The silence came first. Not the comforting silence between stars that every seasoned navigator learned to respect, but a silence so complete that it felt unnatural, as though the universe itself had stopped breathing. Across the galactic relay network, trillions of communication channels blinked out in the exact same heartbeat. Voices vanished mid-sentence. Emergency beacons froze before transmitting their final coordinates. Vast command centers filled with officers staring at lifeless displays, waiting for signals that never returned. It wasn't a system failure. It wasn't an attack anyone could detect. It was something far worse. Humanity had simply gone quiet. On the Council's capital world of Illyrian, the towering Hall of Unity remained alive with celebration. Crystal chandeliers suspended by anti-gravity fields cast rivers of blue light across polished obsidian floors while diplomats from hundreds of civilizations toasted what they believed was the greatest political victory in galactic history. After years of bitter negotiations, endless sanctions, and relentless pressure, humanity had finally yielded, or so everyone assumed. Their ambassadors had departed without protest. Their fleets had withdrawn from shared patrol routes. Their military representatives had signed no declarations, offered no speeches, and made no dramatic threats. They had simply stood, exchanged unreadable glances, and walked away without a single word. At first, the Council interpreted the silence as defeat. Cheers echoed through the chamber. Some celebrated the end of what they called human arrogance. Others praised themselves for proving that no civilization, no matter how stubborn or militarily capable, could stand against the united will of the galaxy. Commentators flooded public broadcasts with confident predictions. Trade would flourish. Military spending would shrink. A new golden age was about to begin. Then the reports started arriving. Human embassies across thousands of worlds were empty. Their orbital stations drifted in perfect order, powered but abandoned. Cargo docks stood immaculate, every container removed with impossible precision. Defense fleets that had patrolled dangerous sectors for generations had vanished without leaving debris, distress calls, or flight records. Even long-range sensors capable of tracking individual quantum signatures found nothing. It was as though an entire civilization had erased itself from the stars between one breath and the next. Confusion replaced celebration. Council investigators rushed to human territories expecting sabotage, rebellion, or hidden armies preparing an ambush. Instead, they found immaculate cities with lights still glowing in empty windows. Trains continued to glide along magnetic rails with no passengers aboard. Autonomous maintenance drones quietly cleaned spotless streets that no footsteps disturbed. Children's toys rested exactly where they had been left. Dinner tables remained perfectly set. There were no signs of panic. No violence. No hurried evacuation. Only absence. The discovery unsettled even the most experienced officials. Civilizations did not disappear like this. Empires collapsed into chaos. Refugees fled. Governments fractured. But humanity had left behind no fear, no disorder, no evidence that anything had gone wrong. It was as though billions of people had followed a plan rehearsed long before anyone realized it existed. Deep inside the Council's central intelligence vault, analysts replayed the final recordings again and again. The last human transmissions contained no coded messages. No hidden warnings. No encrypted countdowns. Just ordinary conversations ending in quiet acknowledgements before every frequency fell dark at precisely the same nanosecond. The synchronization was impossible. No civilization possessed that level of coordination. A cold realization settled over the room. This had not been a retreat. It had been a decision. And somewhere beyond the reach of every telescope and every sensor, humanity had chosen to disappear together. As the celebration on Illyrian dissolved into nervous whispers, one question spread through the galaxy faster than any official announcement ever could. Where had the humans gone? No one knew that the question itself was the beginning of the nightmare. Because humanity had not abandoned the galaxy. They had abandoned the responsibility of protecting it. For more than 2 centuries, the galaxy believed peace had become the natural order of civilization. Endless trade routes stitched together thousands of inhabited worlds like glowing veins across the darkness. Freight carriers loaded with rare minerals crossed hyperspace beside elegant passenger liners carrying diplomats, scientists, and dreamers from every known species. Floating cities orbited gas giants wrapped in shimmering auroras. Agricultural moons fed entire star systems beneath artificial suns. The Galactic Council proudly claimed that cooperation, law, and diplomacy had ended the age of endless war. Its senators spoke beneath towering crystalline arches on Illyrian, where holographic constellations drifted across the chamber ceiling like living galaxies. Every victory, every thriving colony, every peaceful generation was presented as proof that enlightened governments, not soldiers, had built the future. Very few questioned why that future never seemed to collapse. Among the few who understood the truth was Admiral Elena Ward. She stood alone on the observation deck of the human flagship Resolute, watching streams of civilian traffic flow through the nearby jump gate. From a distance, it looked beautiful, thousands of lights gliding silently into the endless ocean of stars. Families returning home. Cargo destined for distant colonies. Medical convoys carrying life-saving supplies. To everyone else, it was another ordinary day. To Elena, every peaceful voyage was another miracle held together by invisible hands. Because she knew what hid behind the illusion. Every jump gate in the galaxy required constant maintenance using technologies so ancient that even their creators had disappeared into history. Microscopic fractures formed inside the quantum lattice every single day. Left unchecked, those fractures could expand without warning, swallowing entire fleets into dimensions from which nothing had ever returned. Humanity had inherited the knowledge to repair them generations ago. Rather than reveal the terrifying fragility of galactic infrastructure, they quietly accepted the burden themselves. The Council never asked. The humans never complained. It became an unspoken promise. Beyond the official trade lanes, human patrol groups ventured even farther into sectors erased from every public star chart. Regions where sensor readings bent into impossible shapes. Regions where exploration ships from other civilizations had mysteriously disappeared centuries earlier. Human captains knew those sectors by another name. The Front. There, hidden in the black silence between galaxies, they monitored things no Council citizen was ever meant to see. Massive containment arrays surrounded ancient anomalies older than recorded history. Automated listening stations watched sleeping entities drifting through interstellar voids. Silent fortresses stood guard over cosmic wounds that should never be allowed to open. Every patrol returned with fewer ships. Official reports listed routine accidents. The truth remained classified. Admiral Ward carried those casualty lists herself. She had watched generations of officers volunteer for missions they knew they might never survive, all so billions of strangers could continue believing peace required nothing more than political speeches and carefully negotiated treaties. Sometimes she wondered whether history would ever remember their names. Deep beneath Illyrian's gleaming towers, however, another meeting was unfolding. Council representatives argued that humanity had become too powerful, too independent, too unwilling to submit to centralized authority. Economic sanctions were proposed. Military oversight demanded. Human fleets, they insisted, must be reduced for the safety of every member civilization. Their warnings about hidden threats were dismissed as fearmongering designed to justify an oversized military. Elena attended the final hearing without interruption. She listened as senators accused humanity of exaggerating dangers that no one else had ever witnessed. They questioned every classified operation. Every emergency deployment. Every unexplained budget request. When they finished, the chamber fell silent. For a long moment, Elena simply looked around the room. At faces untouched by the horrors waiting beyond the maps. At leaders who genuinely believed the galaxy had become safe on its own. She realized then that no speech would ever change their minds. So she slowly stood. Nodded once. Turned toward the exit. And without a single argument, humanity began preparing to leave the responsibilities that no one else even knew existed. The first signs of collapse were almost too small to notice. A merchant convoy traveling through the ardent corridor reported a navigation delay of only 17 seconds. Controllers blamed routine interference. Hours later, a passenger liner emerging from another jump gate arrived 3 light-years off course, its passengers shaken but alive. Engineers searched desperately for mechanical faults they could explain. None appeared. By the end of the week, entire hyperspace routes flickered in and out of existence like dying veins across the galactic network. Freight shipments stalled. Medical supplies failed to reach frontier colonies. Emergency rescue fleets became stranded between systems, unable to calculate stable jumps through corridors that had functioned flawlessly for centuries. The Council assured everyone the disruptions were temporary. They were wrong. One by one, the ancient jump gates began to fail completely. Gigantic rings that had connected civilizations for generations erupted with unstable blue arcs before collapsing into silent darkness. Some gates folded inward, crushing anything still passing through them. Others opened for only a fraction of a second before releasing violent gravitational storms that tore ships apart without leaving recognizable wreckage. Entire star systems became isolated overnight. Families waited endlessly for loved ones who would never arrive. Planetary economies crumbled as food shipments disappeared. The illusion of an unbreakable galactic civilization fractured faster than anyone believed possible. Then came the distress calls. At first there were only scattered reports from distant frontier colonies, automated emergency beacons broadcasting fragmented messages filled with static and screams. Officials assumed pirates had taken advantage of the transportation crisis. Patrol squadrons were dispatched with confidence. None returned. The recordings that reached Council intelligence were almost impossible to watch. Helmet cameras captured cities vanishing beneath shadows that moved against the light itself. Orbital defense platforms fired continuously into empty space before exploding from impacts no sensors could identify. Survivors spoke of impossible shapes drifting through the darkness beyond their settlements, vast biomechanical creatures wrapped in living armor, their bodies stitched together from black metallic bone and pulsing crimson tissue. They made no battle cries. No threats. They simply advanced with horrifying patience, reducing entire colonies to silence within hours. Panic spread across the galaxy. For the first time in living memory, the Council's magnificent defense fleets were ordered into full-scale combat. Thousands of warships launched from glittering orbital docks amid triumphant speeches promising swift victory. Citizens gathered around public broadcasts believing their governments would restore order as they always had. Instead, they witnessed catastrophe. Weapons that had dominated every known conflict barely scarred the creatures' armored hides. Coordinated fleet formations collapsed within minutes as invisible gravitational waves twisted cruisers into molten wreckage. Admirals who had spent entire careers studying conventional warfare suddenly faced enemies that ignored every known military doctrine. Sensor systems malfunctioned simply by observing them. Artificial intelligences shut themselves down after processing impossible biological patterns. Veteran commanders found themselves fighting an enemy they could neither predict nor understand. Desperation replaced confidence. As casualty reports flooded the Council chambers, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every attack originated near sectors once patrolled exclusively by human fleets. Every breached frontier corresponded with regions humanity had insisted on guarding without assistance. Archived navigation records revealed hundreds of classified patrol routes that no one had questioned because the humans had never asked for recognition. The realization settled over every command center like ice. These monsters were not new. They had never invaded. They had always been waiting, just beyond the edges of civilization. For centuries, while the galaxy celebrated its own wisdom, humanity had stood alone in the darkness, fighting battles no history book recorded and burying heroes whose names no one outside their own species would ever know. Now the Guardians were gone. And for the first time in 200 years, the darkness was finally allowed to cross the line. The abandoned human embassy stood untouched in the heart of Illyrian, surrounded by towering alien monuments that now felt strangely insignificant. Dust had begun settling across its polished steel entrance, yet nothing inside showed signs of panic or destruction. The lights still glowed with quiet efficiency. Air filtration systems continued humming beneath spotless floors. Every chair remained perfectly aligned around conference tables where impossible negotiations had once taken place. It was not the ruin of a civilization. It was the careful closing of a chapter. Council investigators entered with weapons drawn, their footsteps echoing through hallways that felt more like memorials than government offices. At the center of the embassy, beneath layers of biometric security that no longer resisted them, they discovered a single sealed chamber. There were no traps. No alarms. Only a black metallic archive resting alone beneath a circle of soft white light. Across its surface, engraved in dozens of galactic languages, appeared one simple sentence. Open only after we are gone. No one spoke. The chamber seemed to absorb every sound as the archive slowly unfolded, revealing thousands of crystalline memory cores suspended in magnetic fields. Holographic projectors awakened automatically, flooding the room with recordings that had never appeared in any council database. The first images shattered everything they believed. Human fleets were not attacking neighboring civilizations as many politicians had claimed for decades. They were defending forgotten sectors buried beyond official star charts. Massive battle recordings unfolded around the investigators in breathtaking detail. Entire armadas disappeared into impossible storms while escorting evacuation convoys that history had never acknowledged. Planet-sized containment stations detonated to imprison entities that dwarfed moons. Human marines fought inside collapsing research facilities where reality itself seemed to fracture, sealing breaches that would have consumed inhabited worlds had they remained open for even a few more minutes. Every victory had remained classified. Every sacrifice had remained anonymous. The recordings continued. Casualty reports stretched endlessly across the chamber like rivers of names. Hundreds of thousands became millions. Millions became numbers so vast that several investigators quietly lowered their eyes, unable to continue reading. Generation after generation of human soldiers, engineers, scientists, medics, and volunteers had vanished into operations officially recorded as routine maintenance, navigation anomalies, or training exercises. Entire colonies had willingly relocated to support hidden military fronts that no civilian outside humanity had ever been allowed to know existed. One investigator whispered the question no one wanted answered. Why hide all of this? The archive responded. A pre-recorded message appeared above the central projector. Admiral Elena Ward stood in simple naval uniform, older than many remembered her, exhaustion visible behind calm, unwavering eyes. There was no bitterness in her expression. No accusation. Only quiet certainty. We concealed these wars because fear destroys civilizations faster than monsters ever could. If every child believed extinction waited beyond the next star, exploration would end. Trade would end. Hope would end. Someone had to carry the burden while everyone else built a future worth protecting. The room remained utterly still. Then the final files activated. Ancient star maps spread across the chamber, revealing thousands of classified containment zones surrounding cosmic prisons hidden throughout the galaxy. Every location was marked with human watch stations. Every single station now displayed the same status. Offline. Beneath the maps appeared humanity's final message to the Council. No demands. No threats. No celebration. Just a single sentence that echoed through every heart in the chamber with unbearable weight. You believed peace existed because you created it. You asked us to surrender the burden. We have honored your decision. It now belongs to you, ***. No voice was raised. No one argued. For the first time since humanity's disappearance, the Council finally understood the true price of its own ignorance. The galaxy had never been protected by treaties. It had been protected by people willing to disappear into the darkness, and never ask to be remembered. The alarms began as a low mechanical pulse beneath the Council's command chamber, but within seconds the sound rose into a deafening chorus that echoed across every inhabited world. Emergency holograms flickered to life, projecting the same impossible image above countless cities. One of the ancient containment zones had failed. The prison orbiting the dead star of Nereth had collapsed completely, and something unimaginably vast was emerging from the darkness. Long-range telescopes struggled to focus as space itself bent around the object. It did not resemble a ship, a creature, or any life form recorded in galactic history. It was a living abyss, an enormous mass of shifting black armor threaded with rivers of crimson light, so immense that nearby moons were pulled from their orbits as it moved. Gravity distorted around its body like water circling a drain, swallowing light, sound, and hope together. Every available Council fleet was ordered into the sector. Thousands of warships answered. From every civilization, they came in desperate formation, sleek cruisers armed with antimatter lances, massive carrier platforms launching endless waves of fighters, defense frigates whose shields had once been considered invincible. Their captains knew the odds were hopeless, but retreat meant abandoning billions of innocent lives scattered across nearby systems. The combined fleet formed a glittering wall of steel between the creature and civilization itself. The first volley illuminated space brighter than a newborn sun. Beams capable of splitting continents slammed into the entity's surface. Nothing happened. The abyss continued forward. Its response required no visible weapon. A ripple expanded silently from its body, invisible except for the stars that warped and disappeared within it. Entire battle groups folded inward as though squeezed by the hands of a giant. Cruisers twisted into molten spirals before vanishing completely. Fighter squadrons simply ceased to exist, erased without explosions, without debris, without even a final transmission. Veteran admirals watched decades of military strength disappear in less than a minute. The line was breaking. Across the command chamber on Illyrian, silence replaced frantic orders. Officers stared at casualty reports updating faster than anyone could read them. There were no remaining reinforcements. No secret fleets waiting beyond hyperspace. The Council had reached the end of its strength. Then, without warning, every abandoned human beacon in the galaxy came alive. From forgotten moons, hidden asteroid fields, rogue planets drifting beyond mapped space, and silent stations buried inside the rings of dead worlds, ancient transmitters awakened together. Golden pulses raced across the stars through frequencies no Council system even knew existed. Deep beneath frozen mountains and inside hollow worlds, enormous vault doors that had remained sealed for centuries began to open. The contingency had begun. One after another, colossal human dreadnoughts emerged from their hidden docks. They carried no living crews. Bridge windows remained dark. Their hulls bore centuries of scars from battles history had never recorded. Artificial intelligences, awakened by humanity's final command, assumed control with flawless precision. Every vessel accelerated toward the collapsing front without hesitation, linked together by a tactical network operating faster than thought itself. At the center of every bridge appeared the same holographic figure. Admiral Elena Ward. Not alive, but preserved within a strategic intelligence built from her memories, decisions, and command protocols. Her calm voice spread across every allied frequency. If you are hearing this, then humanity failed to return in time. This fleet was never meant to replace us. It was built to buy you one last chance. The automated armada struck with breathtaking coordination. Some dreadnoughts unleashed weapons that folded space around the creature, slowing its impossible advance. Others deliberately rammed themselves into fractures forming around the ancient prison, detonating their own reactors to rebuild sections of the collapsing containment field. Entire capital ships sacrificed themselves without hesitation, each calculated loss strengthening the prison for a few precious seconds longer. Piece by piece, the abyss was forced backward toward the breach it had escaped. Finally, as the last surviving human flagship reached the center of the battlefield, it transmitted one final command. Every remaining vessel locked itself into position. Every reactor overloaded. A storm brighter than 1,000 suns erupted across the void. When the light finally faded, the monstrous entity had vanished behind a newly forged containment barrier. The human fleet was gone. Not a single dreadnought remained. Humanity had already walked away from the galaxy. Yet even in their absence, they kept their final promise. They stood between the darkness and everyone else. Until there was nothing left of themselves to give. Years passed, but the galaxy never truly recovered from the day it learned what humanity had been carrying in silence. The wars ended, the shattered jump gates were slowly rebuilt, and trade once again flowed between distant stars, yet something fundamental had changed in every civilization. The old confidence was gone. No one spoke carelessly about peace anymore. Every child grew up knowing that peace was never a permanent gift, it was something earned, protected, and paid for by those willing to stand where no one else dared. Across the Galactic Council, monuments of polished crystal and living stone were raised in honor of heroes from every species, but the grandest memorial remained the simplest. Inside the Hall of Unity on Illyrian, one circle of seats was left forever empty. The human delegation never returned. Dust never gathered there. No official was permitted to sit in those chairs. Above them, suspended within a beam of soft white light, floated the emblem of Earth, a blue planet surrounded by silent stars. It required no speech, no ceremony, no explanation. Every delegate who entered the chamber instinctively lowered their voice as they passed. Even newly elected representatives who had never witnessed the great withdrawal could feel the weight lingering in that quiet corner of the room. It had become more than a memorial. It was a promise never to forget. History itself was rewritten. The classified archives humanity had left behind became mandatory study in every military academy, scientific institute, and diplomatic university across the galaxy. Students no longer learned only about famous treaties or celebrated politicians. They studied forgotten engineers who repaired dying jump gates in isolation. They read the journals of volunteers who stood watch at abandoned containment stations knowing rescue might never come. They learned that the greatest victories were often invisible because successful guardians left no disasters behind to remember. Slowly, another tradition began to spread. Before every exploration mission crossed beyond known space, crews observed 1 minute of complete silence. Not out of fear. Out of respect. The silence reminded them of the civilization that had once vanished without a single farewell. Far beyond the restored borders of civilized space, however, the search never stopped. Exploration vessels carrying crews from dozens of worlds ventured deeper into unmapped regions than anyone had ever dared before. They followed ancient human patrol routes reconstructed from damaged archives. They investigated abandoned listening stations hidden inside drifting asteroids. They discovered lonely watchtowers orbiting dead stars, their reactors still functioning after centuries, faithfully monitoring prisons that remained securely locked. Every discovery revealed the same extraordinary truth. Even after humanity disappeared, their work continued. Machines quietly maintained systems no living hands remained to repair. Automated satellites adjusted orbital defenses with flawless precision. Emergency beacons still activated whenever unknown anomalies approached civilized space. It was as though humanity had built an entire generation of guardians that refused to abandon their duty simply because their creators were gone. Many believed the search was hopeless. Others refused to surrender hope. Legend spread through frontier colonies of unidentified ships glimpsed beyond distant nebulae. Traders whispered about encrypted signals that vanished before anyone could decode them. Deep space miners claimed they occasionally found fresh repairs on ancient watch stations that should have been completely abandoned. No evidence was ever confirmed. Every investigation ended with empty stars and unanswered questions. Yet somehow, the hope remained alive. On quiet nights, children across countless worlds looked toward the endless sky and asked their parents whether the humans would ever come home. No one knew the answer. But every parent answered the same way. If they still exist, they're probably protecting someone. And somewhere beyond the last mapped star, where darkness stretched farther than any chart could measure, ancient human watchtowers continued to face the endless void without fear. Their lights never went out. Because the galaxy had finally learned the truth that history would carry forever. True greatness is not measured by the glory others witness. It is measured by the sacrifices made when no one is watching, and by the courage to keep standing guard, even after the entire universe has forgotten your name.